Well, I'm trying to finish up this HiWatt Custom 50, and it's been very frustrating. So let me tell you where we're at now. So the input jacks have been replaced. All the output jacks and the effects loop jacks have been replaced, that wiring redone. The grounds for those jacks are running here, then to here, then to the chassis connection beneath this board. And I may revisit running them to here. I might run them directly to that chassis connection. That's going to be a pain in the butt. I got to take the pots off to do that, but it might be worthwhile. So these two electrolytic caps have been changed out. That cap there has been changed out. Can you see where I'm pointing? Yeah, okay. And this cap here was bad on this tube socket. And critically, when I first powered it up after getting it to this point, there was a lot of buzz because the heater supply for all the preamp tubes was running this way underneath the board. And so every one of these wires here was running pretty much in parallel with the heater supply. So I've moved the heaters to this side of the preamp tubes, the way you'd find on a quote, real HiWatt. So here the heaters are coming this way now, like on traditional HiWatts, not made in Modesto. And all the grids that were going over here would have crossed over this. I have either moved them up in the air like these solid wire ones here, or where it's a shielded wire, I have dressed them from the other side like these two here. And on the note of that shielding, the insulation used to stop, and then they had about 2 inches of non-insulated run there. There's enough slack in those wires. I was able to get the insulation to, the shielding to stop, about 1/4 inch or less from the actual grid. That's better. This amp, like most HiWatts, does not have grid stoppers on the inputs, which are here and here. That would be better if they did have some. Let's see here. There is a greatly reduced hum. You can see I've got this alligator clamp here running from here over to this ground point, just temporarily. This red wire is the ground from the reverb circuit, and it was all going here, and it was noisier here than it is over here. So I do need to pull this entire board out again to run the wire, replace this red wire going to the input ground point on the chassis. And at that point, I'll run these output jack grounds directly there rather than running through this, because this is the screen, HT2 and HT3 negative, and it's right now going to the same negative as HT4 and 5. I think I'm going to run this directly to that ground as well. So this and the output jacks and this reverb stuff will all meet at that chassis location rather than being connected kind of in series, even though it is from noisiest to quietest. The discrete wiring will be better. At this point, there is, I'm going to turn the master all the way up. There's still a little bit of a buzzy hash. This is with the artificial center tap resistors, and I suspect, based on that sound, that if I were to put a pot in temporarily and find what the right balance for those is, I could get that dialed out. Sometimes a perfect balance, as far as resistors go, does not really balance out inconsistencies in the winding of the transformer. So I think a heater balance trim pot might be a good idea. And since it's really hard to get, 200 ohm, 100 ohm, 500 ohm trim pots with any current handling, and there's a lot of current there, I'll probably have to do it quickly as a experiment, then find resistors that give the right ratio rather than just 100 and 100. Something I don't have to do very commonly, but the sound that I'm hearing is the sound that can be dialed out with a better balance in the heater supply. And there's a bit of channel bleed. I'm not going to play for you right now because the app's not ready for prime time. I want to get all this stuff addressed. But if I plugged into the input here, we turn the master back up, have the channel volumes off. With the master all the way up, that's a ton of bleed. The master all the way up with those channel volumes all the way off is as loud as a Princeton. Now granted, this is a really loud amp. With the master volume turned up a quarter, you can hear that bleed, but as soon as you turn the actual volume up on the channel, it gets drowned out to a large degree. But that means that the V2 stage is picking up signal from the input. Even with the volumes off it, there's just bleed in that area. And I've played around with lead dressed, and all the grids are shielded. I can't show you very easily in this video, but I'll point out what I've done. We've got two 500K volume pots here. The wiper of each goes to a 470K resistor to a common point, which feeds here, V2A, and it's shielded and all that. Here's the common, the center, and here's the shield point for that. If I ground out the input of either pot, I still have that bleed. If I ground out the wiper of either pot, I still have that bleed. If I ground out the junction, which is the actual grid of V2, that goes away. So it is being picked up by the grid of V2, but it is not being fed from these pots. It's just in this area, and I'm not quite sure why that is. It's not the tube with triodes bleeding or anything. It may just be because V2 has an additional gain stage compared to traditional HiWatts, and it has a lot more gain. Let me power this off and show you what I've drawn up. Okay, this is the tone stack through the phase inverter, and with the exception of a few caps being slightly different values and a grid stopper added between the master volume and V4B, this is pretty much the standard HiWatt 50 watt output section. There's a better way to draw this, but I was drawing what I found as I measured it rather than looking at the schematic from HiWatt, and because it would make me see what I was expecting to see. This, I confirmed everything and then puzzled out how it's connected. And if I were to redraw this, it would look more like the official schematic. And I compared it to some HiWatt schematics and some schematics that Mark Huss drew up of 70s and 80s HiWatts. And this stuff is all pretty regular. It's the preamp that's a little bit weird. So here we have the inputs, and you can see there's no grid stopper on either input. V1A, the bright channel, has got a 2.2 nanofarad from the grid to the cathode, which rolls off some of the highs. And because it has a very small coupling cap feeding the next stage, it rolls off a lot of the lows. So it's a very kind of focused, beamy, narrow mids channel overall. You'll get to hear it later. The normal channel, on contrast, is pretty much full frequency. It has, 47 nanofarad with the 500, actually measures 680K with the 470K, so it makes it really about 300K load on the 47 nanofarad. Maybe, well, it's complicated math because it's parallel through this, but anyway, it's got a lot of lows, and the shared cathode between these two with 1.5K bypass with 150 microfarad, that's pretty much infinitely flat. All frequencies pretty much are coming out of this channel. And the normal channel in this amp is not dark because of stuff that happens later in the circuit. So this is kind of the channel most people would find most what they're used to coming from Marshall and Fender and stuff. This is a very kind of unpleasant sound until you get into higher gain, in which case then it begins to shine. You'll hear that later when I have the amp 100%. So then it goes to the 470K mixers, like I mentioned, goes to V2A. Notice there is no grid stopper there. That might be part of the problem for that channel bleed. And then it's got a 1K cathode bypassed by 47 nanofarad. That's pretty typical for this kind of HiWatt, though a lot of times they won't bypass it here, they'll bypass it here. They've not done that here after the master volume. Then it's got the 220K and then a 22 nanofarad and 47K to ground. This is the added gain stage here. Normally the plate of V2A would feed the tone stack. In this case, there's an additional gain stage It doesn't have a voltage drop between them. It just dumps a lot of the lows here, and it is got a very high load on the preceding stage, so it's not as much gain as it would be if this were like a 1 meg, but it's an awful lot of gain. Typically, you would design some kind of voltage divider here, and they don't, and so there's just whatever signal is present here gets amplified an awful lot. So any small amount of bleed from proximity to the input or whatever gets amplified a lot, as you've heard. And V2B is pretty much what this V2A stage traditionally would be, with 100K and 1.5K not bypassed, feeding the tone stack. So basically, I guess a better way to look at it is in most HiWatts, the junction of these bleeder resistors, mixer resistors, the 470Ks, would go here to V2B and the rest of the amp, and V2A would be non-existent. But here, they've added a lot of gain, and I don't know that this is not the most intelligent way to do this. I would probably have said, well, let's put a voltage divider in there until that bleed goes away at least, and we'll be sure everything's stable. And if we need more gain in the amp, we could bypass here on that cathode. We could bypass here on this cathode. We could choose different cap values to give treble emphasis or upper mids emphasis or full frequency, whatever. But this is what they did, at least at this time in California. So that's why this amp sounds a bit unusual compared to other HiWatts. I'm not going to say better, I'm not going to say worse, just it's a different approach. If you keep the trouble with it is for cleans, and HiWatts are known for cleans, you don't have a lot of clean headroom in this. If you turn the channel volume on the normal channel from 0 to 2, you're at the edge of breakup. We'll get there later. And, I've not spoken to the owner yet about whether he's always loved the sound of this amp or whether he thought he was getting the Gilmore kind of thing or the Live at Leeds kind of thing, because in stock form, this ain't it. But I could literally move 2 wires and this thing would become that. We'll jump off that bridge when we come to it. But I've got some ground wires to move, and I've got some heater balance resistors to play around with to get rid of that last bit of buzz. Long shot I'm going to do first because it's pretty easy to do. You can just see, still has the original diodes here in the rectification, and sometimes these diodes can be buzzy even if they still measure as good and still function as a rectifier. So I'm going to change those 2 out because it's very easy to do before I do any of the other stuff, just in case that magically fixes that buzz. I'm still going to do the ground changes, but the heater balance stuff, because playing around with heater balance pots is tricky. You've got to do parallel stuff. Anyway, I'm going on and on. Those of you who know what I'm talking about already know what I'm talking about. Those of you who would need a long explanation, now's not the time for a long explanation. But anyway, we're going to stop here for now. This is an awful lot of work. It's a lot of good work. I'm very proud of it. But it's frustrating that there are amps which I just repair and restore because they used to work well. And I know that they used to work well. And there are amps that if I just fix them, they're still going to sound bad or they're going to fail again. This is the kind of amp that if I had just fixed it, made it back like it was in 1986, this would not be a very good sounding amp. And for a little bit more work and not a lot of changes, this is going to be a much, much better example of something which says HiWatt on it, regardless of where it came from. Thanks for watching.